2 Mars AM, May 27th, 1940. Coastal cliffs, northern France. The air is thick with the scent of salt water and burning oil. Below, the relentless sea consumes the last remnants of the BEF in the inferno of Dunkirk. The collapse was not merely strategic, it was psychological. The Wehrmacht, a mechanized tide of terror, had carved through the Low Countries and France with blinding speed, a concept soon to be termed Blitzkrieg. Across the Channel, Britain stood alone, bruised, awaiting the seemingly inevitable knock. Yet, history is not only made by grand armies, it is often shaped by shadows. Our story begins not in the mud of Flanders, but in the brutal sunlight of Southeast Asia, a world away. Before the war consumed the Pacific, before Pearl Harbor, there was the slow, simmering rot of occupation. Captain Miles Harding, an intelligence officer attached to a diplomatic mission in Shanghai, watched the slow, meticulous horror of the Imperial Japanese expansion. He was an analyst of patterns, a student of the unseen connections between remote events. In late 1939, during a perilous extraction of foreign nationals from a Japanese-controlled zone, a mission officially designated as non-existent, Harding made a choice that would haunt and define him. Amidst the chaos of a hastily abandoned detention center, he found her. A girl, no older than 15, her face a mask of shock, her eyes empty. They called her the Silent Girl. She offered no name, no history, only a profound, unnatural stillness. The trauma had sealed her away. Harding, against regulations and all common sense, took her. He saw not a liability, but an anomaly, a piece of the puzzle that was the Pacific rising sun. What Harding could not know, as he smuggled the girl onto a cargo ship bound for Europe, was the terrifying contradiction he was bringing into the heart of the European conflict. The British Security Coordination, operating out of New York, was beginning to piece together the global nature of this war. They were desperate for any advantage, any unique perspective on Axis paranoia. Harding and his silent ward were deemed assets, though for reasons nobody fully understood. The irony was staggering. The Allies were seeking technology, radars, codes, better tanks. But the most potent weapon to cross the Atlantic was a traumatized girl whose silence concealed a profound and unique form of knowledge. The experts assumed her silence was the depth of her injury. What they failed to grasp was that silence is often the most sophisticated camouflage. It was a failure of imagination, a classic historical blindness, the belief that the past determines the present. They assumed her past had broken her. In truth, it had forged her into something cold, sharp, and entirely unknown. She was housed in a secluded manor near Oxford, studied by linguists and psychologists. She remained an impenetrable wall. Meanwhile, Harding, a master of tradecraft, was recruited by the newly formed Special Operations Executive, or SOE, the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. His expertise in Pacific paranoia was repurposed for the European fight. The SOE was not interested in armies. Their brief was simple: set Europe ablaze. This required infiltration, sabotage, and, crucially, communication. The technology of secrecy was paramount. The SOE's agents relied on the most advanced, yet most rudimentary, means of communication: the clandestine radio set. The B-2 spy set, a suitcase transmitter, was their lifeblood, capable of sending a brief burst of Morse code over vast distances. But the sheer volume of radio traffic was the biggest liability. Every transmission was a whisper in the wind, but every whisper could be geolocated by the German Funkabwehr, their radio counterintelligence. The average lifespan of a clandestine operator in France was measured in weeks. The Funkabwehr were methodical, patient, and terrifyingly efficient. Harding's first mission was to train new recruits in the psychological warfare of clandestine radio operation, the subtle arts of brevity, security, and the deadly dance with the enemy's direction-finding DF patrols. He excelled at teaching the fear. But the solution to the volume problem remained elusive. How could they flood the airwaves without being caught? It was in a moment of utter frustration, reviewing pages of German radio intercept analysis, that Harding experienced the first crack in the girl's silence. She was sitting quietly in his study, observing the arcane patterns of radio pulses on the paper, when she reached out a thin finger and tapped a single, highly irregular sequence of short burst transmissions. Her eyes, usually dead, held a flicker of recognition, a silent, minute gesture that rewrote the rules of the entire conflict. The pattern she tapped was utterly non-random, yet defied all known encryption. It was not English. It was not German. It was something else. Harding, ever the analyst, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the English weather. He knew instantly. The girl was not silent because she was broken. She was silent because she was waiting. And the thing she recognized was a language, or a code, that had nothing to do with Europe, but everything to do with the shadows of the Pacific. A link had been established, a terrifying bridge between the two theaters of a global war. The true journey and the true danger had just begun. If you are finding this deep dive into the true operational secrecy of World War II compelling, please consider subscribing and pressing the notification bell. Your support helps us uncover the forgotten human stories behind the great conflict. Autumn 1941. SOE Training Facility, Special Operations School, STS, 21, Arisaig, Scotland. The Scottish Highlands, rugged and remote, offered the perfect cover for the dark arts taught by the SOE. Here, Miles Harding, now codenamed Merlin, was not merely training agents. He was a man obsessed with a single, two-pronged enigma: the Germans' deadly efficiency in radio detection and the silent girl's fleeting recognition of an unknown transmission pattern. Harding knew the girl, whom he had informally named Ilara after a distant moon, was the key. He brought her to the edge of the training grounds, an environment of calculated chaos and manufactured terror, hoping the familiarity of danger might unlock the vault of her mind. The German system, known as the Y-Dienst, was a masterpiece of technological paranoia. They didn't just listen, they hunted. Using high-frequency direction-finding equipment, large rotating loop antennas, mounted on special trucks, Peilwagen, the Funkabwehr could triangulate the source of a signal in minutes. A typical SOE operator transmitted for 15 to 30 minutes. The DF vans needed only 10. This gap, this 5-minute window, was the margin of life and death. The goal of every SOE radio operator was to flash their message, transmit and move, before the enemy's Peilwagen could close the circle. Harding focused on the pattern Ilara had recognized, a series of ultra-short bursts of code sent with a rapid-fire cadence that sounded like static to the untrained ear. It was almost a form of time division multiplexing, a revolutionary concept of squeezing massive amounts of data into minuscule transmission windows, though achieved through human skill, not machine. He consulted cryptographers, linguists, and even cultural anthropologists. No one could place the pattern. One day, a former missionary from the Philippines, now an SOE instructor, recognized something subtle: the rhythm. It wasn't Morse. It was the rhythm of a spoken language, stripped of sound, converted to a unique, highly compact, and stylized form of short-burst communication. The rhythm, he suggested, mirrored that of certain high-frequency tonal languages of the South Pacific, languages spoken across scattered islands where the only way to communicate rapidly and safely was through highly efficient rhythmic shorthand. The puzzle became clear. Ilara was a native speaker, or more likely, a product of a secretive Pacific intelligence operation where this compact communication was the standard. The Japanese, in their ruthless pursuit of efficiency, had adopted or co-opted this local method for high-security, ultra-brief transmissions, believing its indigenous roots and lack of formal codification made it unbreakable. They had turned a local dialect's rhythm into a global strategic asset. Harding decided on a desperate gamble. He ignored the official reports stating Ilara was merely catatonic. He began to teach her the B2 radio set, not as a machine, but as an instrument of rhythm. He played her traditional folk music from the regions the missionary had identified, slowly juxtaposing the melodic patterns with the staccato rhythm of the transmission burst. He watched her eyes. They followed the pattern. One evening, as a mock German DF team practiced triangulation nearby, generating loud interference, Ilara reached out and placed her hand on the key. She tapped out a short, clean burst. It was the same length as the intercepted Japanese pattern, but the rhythm was subtly different, more complex, and perfectly timed. Harding recorded the signal. He sent it to London. The analysis came back. Unbreakable. Appears to be highly condensed data packet, rhythmically structured. Cannot be separated from background noise. The breakthrough was not a code, but a technique. Ilara's mind, shattered by trauma, had become a perfect instrument for rhythmic encryption. Her brain had compartmentalized her spoken language, leaving only the pure rhythmic mathematics of the dialect. She could transmit and receive complex messages in a fraction of the time needed for traditional Morse, making the signal so brief it was nearly impossible for the DF teams to locate. It was a human-engineered spread-spectrum communication before the concept was fully understood by scientists. The sheer irony of the situation was monumental. The Germans prided themselves on their technological superiority, their Enigma machine, their blitzkrieg command and control. But their biggest failure was one of anthropological bias. They were looking for complex ciphers when the solution lay in the most ancient of human arts, rhythm and language. Ilara was no longer the silent girl. She was a living, breathing cipher key, a strategic asset of terrifying potential. But she still could not speak a word of English. Her communication was purely in the tap, tap, tap of the radio key. The greatest psychological trauma had created the ultimate technological weapon. Harding knew he couldn't keep her hidden. The SOE was demanding results. They were preparing for the darkest operation yet, establishing a vast, permanent radio network in the heart of occupied France. This network, codenamed Trafalgar, was essential for coordinating future Allied landings. But the current network operators were dying too fast. To survive, they needed Ilara's impossible silence. He was tasked with taking her to France. The man who rescued her from the Japanese now had to put her directly in the path of the Nazis. The circle was tightening. The stage was set for a confrontation. The ultimate industrial military machine versus a highly traumatized girl and the rhythm she carried in her fractured mind. Her silence had been her defense. Now it would be her weapon, aimed at the logistical spine of the Third Reich. Early spring, 1942. A desolate stretch of coastline near Saint-Malo, Brittany, occupied France. The infiltration was textbook SOE, a Lysander aircraft, specially modified to land and take off from a tiny moonlit field, its engine a low, distant drone that masked the danger. Harding and Ilara, disguised as a deaf-mute French couple fleeing the coastal zone, stepped onto the soil of occupied Europe. The air here was heavy with a pervasive, subtle fear. Their target, a dilapidated farmhouse near the village of Saint-Cyr, the proposed central hub of the Trafalgar network. This network was designed not just for sabotage, but as a critical communications backbone, linking London directly to the burgeoning resistance cells. The goal was to prepare the ground for a future, massive landing, a day the Allies called Operation Overlord. Harding, relying on his training in Pacific paranoia, adopted a philosophy of operational minimalism. No unnecessary contact, no established routines, and the constant psychological preparedness for immediate escape. He understood the mindset of the hunter. The German Funkabwehr was everywhere, and their Palewagen patrols were relentless, often disguised as simple civilian delivery vans. The farmhouse attic was their sanctuary. It was cold, damp, and perfectly placed for minimal interference and multiple escape routes. Here, Ilara was introduced to her new reality. A folding table, a chair, a map of Europe, and the omnipresent B2 radio set. The local resistance leader, a former schoolteacher codenamed Le Serpent, was deeply skeptical of the deaf girl. He saw a liability where Harding saw a solution. "Captain," Le Serpent whispered, his voice taut with years of fear, "one mistake, one long transmission, and the Gestapo arrives. Why this girl?" Harding's answer was the first demonstration of Ilara's rhythm. They had to transmit a critical but simple message: Trafalgar operational. Start Phase 1. A skilled Morse operator would take 15 seconds to send the message, including the necessary security preamble and signature. A 15-second signal was enough for a DF van within a 5-mile radius to obtain a perfect fix. Ilara sat down. She did not look at the keys. Her eyes were fixed on the map of the region, almost as if she were charting the radio waves themselves. She touched the key once, twice, 3 times, in a rapid, almost instantaneous sequence. Tap, tap, tap. The entire transmission lasted 1-2 seconds. It was a burst so short, so fast, that it sounded like a single static pop to an uninitiated listener. Back in London, the signal was received with astonishment. The receiving operator initially dismissed it as atmospheric interference, a skip. Only the dedicated analysis team, using specialized audio filtering and spectral analysis developed specifically for her technique, could resolve the message. The data was there, condensed, clear, and perfectly rhythmic. Le Serpent's skepticism turned to a cold, calculating wonder. "She is not deaf," he muttered. "She is simply not speaking our language." The Trafalgar network began to operate, and a strange anomaly appeared in the Funkabwehr operational reports. The number of Allied transmissions did not drop. In fact, the volume of intelligence increased dramatically. Yet the number of captured radio operators plummeted. The average lifespan of a SOE operator in the sector suddenly jumped from 6 weeks to 6 months. The Germans were baffled. Their DF equipment was state-of-the-art Telefunken gear, the best in the world. They analyzed the static. They chased the ghost signals. They started receiving these inexplicable ultra-short pings that they dismissed as local, short-range equipment testing, or, in some internal reports, a newly observed atmospheric phenomenon. This historical irony was the heart of the matter. The Funkabwehr were too technologically arrogant. They were looking for the complexity of the cipher, the length of the message, and the power of the signal. They never considered the rhythm and the speed. Their systems, designed to detect signals lasting 5 seconds or more, simply filtered out Ilara's 1-second flash as meaningless noise. The solution was too simple, too human, and too far outside their European-centric analytical framework. Harding and Ilara operated in this pocket of technological invisibility. She received signals from London, orders, supply drops, contact information, and transmitted intelligence from the French resistance, all in her impossible silence. She was the ghost in the German machine, the single point of failure the entire Axis war effort was failing to recognize. But the silence was also a burden. Ilara had become profoundly reliant on Harding. He was the only connection between her fractured internal world and the constant, mortal threat outside. And in the world of espionage, reliance equals vulnerability. The Germans, failing to locate the transmission, would inevitably begin to hunt the content. They would follow the results of the intelligence, the sabotaged rail lines, the intercepted troop movements, until the circle closed in, not on the radio signal, but on the human beings sending it. The terror was not over. It was merely changing its shape. The network was established, but the price of its survival was soon to be paid. Summer 1942. Gestapo headquarters, Rennes, Brittany. Major Klaus Richter, head of the Funkabwehr for the Western Command, was a meticulous and dangerously intelligent man. He was the embodiment of the German war machine's technical efficiency. Richter was not prone to believing in atmospheric phenomena. The dramatic drop in captured Allied radio operators, juxtaposed with the corresponding rise in successful resistance sabotage operations, was, to him, a pattern, and patterns could be broken. "The radio silence is a lie," Richter stated to his officers, slamming a sheaf of falsified intercept reports onto the table. "They are transmitting, but they are hiding in plain sight. We are looking for a fish. We must start looking for the water itself." Richter changed the tactical doctrine. Instead of relying solely on the Peilwagen to catch the signal in transit, he ordered a deep analysis of all high-frequency noise bursts, regardless of duration. His engineers, working under brutal pressure, designed an experimental filter that focused only on speed and cadence, not power. The breakthrough came through a failure of the human element. An impatient SOE trainee, sent in as a replacement to a distant network, used a slightly slower, less disciplined rhythm for his transmission. The signal, still too short for the standard DF loop, was instantly isolated by Richter's new filter. It was short, but it was there. Richter had his proof. The enemy was using an ultra-brief transmission technique. He nicknamed the ghost signal Die Nadel, the needle, and he tasked his best DF team with an impossible mission. Locate a signal that lasts less than 2 seconds in a city full of competing radio noise. Meanwhile, back at the farmhouse, the Trafalgar network was humming. Ilara was now known simply as Le Fantôme, the ghost, among the resistance. She was receiving and dispatching an unprecedented volume of high-value intelligence on German naval movements in the Bay of Biscay. The information was flowing so freely that London began to doubt its authenticity. It was simply too good. Harding, ever the skeptic, was becoming nervous. He knew a lull in enemy action was often the precursor to a massive operation. He ordered Ilara to increase the frequency of their security bursts, brief, randomized, and meaningless rhythmic signals designed to test the enemy's alertness. Ilara's rhythm became more urgent. She began to show signs of extreme stress. Her nonverbal communication was always precise, but now, her body language around the radio was filled with a frantic energy. She was not just sending and receiving signals. She was, Harding realized, in a rhythmic dialogue with the entire German radio spectrum. She was hearing the change in the enemy's pattern. One evening, as the moon rose over the farmhouse, Ilara was receiving a major message regarding a coordinated rail sabotage plan. Suddenly she stopped. Her hand hovered over the key, frozen. She then reached to the map and with a piece of charcoal drew a small, precise circle around a previously unmarked road junction 20 kilometers away. She then drew a distinct jagged line through the location of the transmission she was currently receiving, effectively cutting the connection. Harding grabbed the binoculars. He saw nothing but the dark French countryside. "What is it, Ilara?" he whispered. She didn't speak. She simply tapped a quick, sharp burst on the key, not a message, but a warning. The rhythm was tight, high-strung, and almost frantic. He understood instantly. She hadn't seen a German patrol. She had heard a German DF signal. Her rhythmic sensitivity was so advanced that she could detect the subtle shift in the background noise caused by the Palewagen's high-gain receiver sweeping for a signal. The enemy's antenna itself was radiating a subtle, almost inaudible rhythmic signature. She had not been triangulated. She had triangulated the hunter. Harding's mind raced. If they were already that close, it meant their initial transmission was too long, or the Germans had found the needle. The operation was compromised. The irony was acute. The German technological superiority had created an electronic sound that only a human mind, trained in the rhythmic nuances of a foreign tongue, could decipher. Their own seeking had betrayed them. Harding's decision was instant and brutal. They had to abandon the farmhouse. But Ilara's transmission, the warning, was already out. The resistance operator who was currently transmitting the rail sabotage details was, at that very moment, completing his transmission, oblivious to the fact that his signal, though fast, was now being focused upon by the new German filter. The dramatic tension peaked as Harding grabbed Ilara's arm. "We leave now!" He heard the faint, high-pitched whine of tires on pavement, followed by the deep, throaty rumble of a heavy engine, the unmistakable sound of a Palewagen accelerating. Richter's trap was closing. They had isolated the frequency, and now they were closing in on the geographic location of the network that had frustrated them for months. The game of hide-and-seek was over. It was now a race for survival. Night, summer 1942. The fields and back roads surrounding Saint-Cyr. The escape was a frantic scramble into the cold, dense woods behind the farmhouse. The B-2 radio set, the heart of the Trafalgar network, was destroyed with a carefully placed incendiary device. Better to lose the intelligence than let the enemy capture the technology and, more importantly, the rhythmic key. Harding and Ilara moved like shadows, relying on the evasive techniques taught in the Scottish Highlands. But the woods were finite, and the enemy was organized. Major Richter, having finally located the operational region, had flooded the sector with Feldgendarmerie, military police, and DF teams. He knew the network was large and valuable. He didn't need to catch the signal again. He just needed to close the net on the area of the last confirmed transmission. The true moment of terror arrived with a simple, common sound. A dog barking in the distance, followed by the crack of a rifle. It meant the Gestapo had caught the operator of the secondary transmitter, the very one Alara had tried to warn. The German net was shrinking. Harding's primary goal shifted from intelligence gathering to the preservation of the only asset that mattered: Alara. He understood the stakes. Her unique rhythmic encryption technique was an operational secret far more valuable than any single piece of intelligence. If the Germans captured her and cracked her methodology, the entire Allied clandestine radio effort would be neutralized. They found temporary refuge in a small, abandoned charcoal burner's hut. The silence was broken only by Alara's shallow breathing. Her trauma was reasserting itself under the extreme pressure. Her eyes were wide, fixated on the darkness outside, seeing ghosts. Harding, ever the analyst, sought an operational solution. He had one small portable radio, a backup, less powerful than the B-2, but capable of transmitting. He knew they couldn't afford a single long transmission. They needed to signal London for an immediate emergency extraction, but the signal had to be utterly untraceable. The situation presented a paradoxical challenge. How to send a complex message? Extraction needed. Sector 4, immediate. In less than 1 second, using a low-power backup radio. The sheer information density required was beyond human capability, even using Alara's rhythmic technique. Harding looked at Alara, whose face was illuminated by the faint moonlight. Her stillness was profound, but her concentration was focused on the ambient noise. She was listening not for the Gestapo's boots, but for the rhythm of the nearby DF truck. Harding had a flash of inspiration, born of the desperation of a man who had analyzed thousands of enemy radio intercepts. The Japanese, the creators of the original rhythmic code, had a unique feature in their communication. They often interspersed the main message with a rhythmic signature, a short, non-random sequence that identified the sender without compromising the message itself. Alara had once shown him this signature, a simple 4-tap rhythmic beat. The plan was a suicide gamble, a misuse of military technology that bordered on genius. He would not send the message extraction needed. He would only send the sender's signature. Harding set up the backup radio. "Alara," he whispered, placing her hand on the key. The 4-tap. Only the 4-tap. Like breathing. He needed her to transmit only the 4-beat sender's rhythm, but he needed her to transmit it synchronously with a major, pre-scheduled but meaningless Allied transmission from London. A transmission London sent every night to test their own systems. The idea was to drown out their own signal. But drowning it out wasn't enough. Alara had to perform an active cancellation of the London signal. She had to transmit her rhythmic signature at the precise moment and on the precise frequency that the London signal was being broadcast, creating an interference pattern that would be registered in London's specialized rhythmic receiver, but would appear to the German DF trucks as a single, complex burst of static originating from London. She was using the Allied transmission as a shield, essentially hijacking its noise to carry her signature. It was an act of operational brilliance, relying on her perfect sense of rhythm to align the two signals down to the microsecond. A machine could not have done it. Only a human being whose rhythmic sense was honed by trauma and language could achieve such perfect, instantaneous synchronization. She tapped the key. Tap, 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 tap. 4 beats. It took 0.8 seconds. In Major Richter's DF van, the crew registered the scheduled London transmission. It was loud, clear, and perfectly traceable to England. But the acoustic quality of the signal on their monitoring equipment was subtly, inexplicably, distorted. It was a single high-frequency stutter. They logged it as localized interference, a non-factor. Richter had missed the needle because he was focused on the entire haystack, and Alara had hidden her needle inside a strand of the haystack itself. Minutes later, an encoded reply came from London. It was a single, rhythmic countersignature, a code only Harding would recognize. Acknowledged. ETA Dawn. Southwest. The extraction was confirmed, but the most dangerous part of the mission was still to come. Surviving the night, the German dragnet, and the crushing psychological weight of Alara's reawakened trauma. The silence had been the key, but the silence could not fight the physical terror of the enemy closing in. The countdown to dawn had begun. Pre-dawn. Summer 1942. A dense, rocky ravine near the designated extraction zone. The hours leading up to dawn were a masterclass in evasion. Harding, drawing on his intelligence training, knew the German search patterns would be systematic. He and Alara moved laterally, avoiding roads and farm tracks, their steps muffled by the deep undergrowth. The tension was not physical, it was auditory. The sound of a distant German troop carrier, the shouted commands of the Feldgendarmerie, and most pressingly, the low, powerful hum of a DF truck moving methodically through the nearby lanes. Major Richter was conducting a personal final sweep. He was convinced his needle was close. Harding realized their location was too exposed for a Lysander landing. He had to signal the pilot, on a completely different frequency, to change the landing zone to an even more remote, less prepared field. This required a transmission. Even a single second of transmission was now a death sentence. The new frequency was a high-band channel, notorious for atmospheric distortion. The Germans monitored it, but less intensely. Harding had to be fast, and he had to be smart. He looked at Alara, whose face was pale, but whose eyes were now intensely alert. She was listening not just to the external world, but to the rhythm of the radio waves themselves. Harding placed the antenna near a large ancient granite rock, a natural Faraday cage that might slightly block or distort the signal's spread, making it harder to pinpoint. "Alara," he murmured, "we need to signal the change. Shift southeast. Field delta. 3 words. The whole message must be less than half a second. Use the fastest rhythm you know." She grasped the key. She tapped it 3 times, in an explosion of soundless energy. Tap, tap, tap. The entire message, using her ultra-compressed rhythmic technique, took 0. 4 seconds. It was a human feat of operational speed. The German DF truck, only a mile away, registered the flash. Richter, who was in the van, shouted, "A single, brief spike! It's the needle! Get a fix now!" The DF operator, using the newly calibrated equipment, struggled. He captured the bearing, but the signal was so fast and so weak, due to the granite shield, that the line was wide and fuzzy, a 3-mile spread. "Sir, it's a ghost. Too fast. The bearing is too wide." Richter, relying on his intelligence, made a brilliant, yet fatal, strategic assumption. The spike originated from the central highest point of the signature spread. "Drive to the ridge. They will be transmitting from the high ground." Richter drove his DF van toward the highest point in the region, the ridge, believing the high ground would give the operator maximum broadcast range. This was standard radio doctrine. But Alara's transmission, shielded by the granite, had been sent from the lowest possible power and the lowest point, the ravine. Richter's over-reliance on radio power and traditional doctrine, the belief that one always transmits from the high ground for better range, led him directly away from the true source. This was the climax of the duel, a conflict not of machines but of strategic rhythm versus technological assumption. The Germans' advanced technology was defeated by a deeper, more human form of communication. As the DF truck's engine rumbled away toward the ridge, Harding and Alara knew they had bought a few precious minutes. But the terror was not over. Suddenly, Alara tensed up again. She pointed to a thin, nearly invisible wire stretched across the opening of the ravine, a tripwire connected to a landmine. Richter, a thorough hunter, had covered his tracks with a primitive but lethal defensive perimeter. Alara didn't flinch. She simply tapped a pattern on Harding's hand. A series of short, quick bursts that mirrored the length of the wire, the depth of the mine, and the pressure it would take to trigger it. The language of rhythm had become the language of movement. He watched her move. She stepped over the wire with the lightness and precision of a dancer, her body moving in a perfect rhythmic sequence that avoided any change in pressure. Her unique traumatic state, which had allowed her to perfect the rhythmic transmission, was now allowing her to navigate the physical world in a way that defied the laws of probability. She had become an operative of pure, operational rhythm. The terror, the mystery, and the technological marvel all converged in this single, impossible act. The girl who had been broken in a Japanese camp had become a living, breathing, uncrackable encryption key, and an operational ghost who moved to the beat of an unseen drum. They had survived the night, not through firepower, but through the superior efficiency of a single human rhythm. The following day, RAF Base, Southern England. The Lysander lands with 2 exhausted, mud-spattered passengers. The extraction was a success. Harding and Alara were debriefed in a secure facility. The intelligence they brought, centered on the newly developing U-boat pens in the Bay of Biscay, was invaluable and immediately acted upon. But the true value was in the methodology, Ilara's rhythm. The Allied command realized they had stumbled upon a weapon of strategic magnitude. They had found the ultimate solution to the Funkabware problem. The technique was immediately designated Operational Method A and applied to a small, elite group of operators who possessed exceptional rhythmic and linguistic skills. The training was brutal, focusing on the human brain's ability to condense and transmit data at inhuman speeds. The irony reached its peak. The technology used by the Allies to win the intelligence war was not a superior machine, but a superior human being, broken and rebuilt by the enemy's own cruelty. The Germans continued to chase the atmospheric phenomena for months, never truly isolating the rhythmic transmissions until the war was nearly over, and by then, the strategic advantage gained by Method A was insurmountable. The Trafalgar network was quickly re-established, and the intelligence flowed like a river. Major Richter, unable to catch the needle, was eventually reassigned to the Eastern Front, a victim of his own technological arrogance. He died convinced that the Allied intelligence successes were due to a massive technological breakthrough in spread-spectrum radio, never realizing the solution was a silent girl and a half-second burst of rhythmic code. Ilara's personal arc concluded not in a triumphant shout, but in a final, profound silence. She was too valuable to be released, too traumatized to be integrated. She spent the rest of the war in a secluded, secure facility, operating as the single, most critical control for Method A operators. She would check their rhythm, their cadence, and their security bursts. She never spoke a word of English or any other language again. The rhythmic communication had consumed the last vestiges of her trauma, leaving behind only the perfect operational key. The man who rescued her, Miles Harding, was instrumental in developing the post-war strategic intelligence framework, always advocating for the study of human factors and cultural anomalies in intelligence gathering. He learned that the most powerful weapon in any conflict is the ability to see the world through the enemy's blind spot. For the Germans, their blind spot was the belief that anything of value had to be complex, technological, and European. Ilara survived the war, but her ultimate fate remains classified. It is rumored that she was taken back to her place of origin in the Pacific, where the silence finally broke, and she could communicate in the language of rhythm with the people who understood her profound, non-verbal history. The greatest lesson of her story is that in the face of massive industrial warfare, the most effective counterweapon is often the one that the enemy's own system has failed to measure. She was the paradox of the Second World War. The most strategically important piece of intelligence technology was a human being whose voice was utterly silent, but whose rhythm saved the free world. Her silence was louder than any radio signal, and more potent than any cipher machine. Spring 1943. High Command Briefing Room, Whitehall, London. The war had raged into its 4th year, and the sheer scale of the Eastern Front overshadowed everything. The upcoming German offensive, codenamed Operation Citadel, aimed at crushing the Soviet salient at Kursk, was poised to be the largest tank battle in history. Allied intelligence knew the date and target were crucial to the war's overall outcome. The success of Ilara's rhythmic communication, Method A, had been limited to France, where the German Funkabwehr was focused on coastal defense. The Eastern Front presented a new, terrifying challenge: a vast expanse, high-power Russian radio jamming, and an intelligence apparatus, the Abwehr, focused on sheer volume. Harding, now a key figure in the Strategic Intelligence Directorate, was tasked with using Ilara's method to confirm the critical German order of battle for Citadel. The information required was immense: unit locations, tank totals, Panther and Tiger, and the precise time of the main assault. No amount of traditional radio transmission could deliver this without instant German triangulation. The solution was not a single operator, but a network of silence. The SOE established 5 small, nondescript transmission points across occupied territory near the Eastern Front, Poland, the Baltics, and 2 in Ukraine. The operators were the best of the Method A trainees, capable of near Elara-level rhythmic compression. Their task, to transmit only one piece of data each, using Elara's rhythm, synchronized perfectly to a massive, scheduled Soviet military communications broadcast, the ultimate radio shield. The 5 transmissions, when overlaid, would create the full picture. Elara, remaining in England, was the central timing mechanism. She listened to the Russian broadcast via a highly sensitive receiver and would send a single microburst signal to the 5 forward operators. This signal was a rhythmic beat, a metronome, telling them the exact millisecond to press their keys. Her traumatic focus had made her a human clock, a perfect timing device. The night of the operation arrived. The 5 operators in the east waited, keys hovering. In London, Elara sat motionless. The Soviet broadcast was a wall of noise. Harding watched her eyes, which were fixed, tracking the micro-rhythms of the distant radio waves. Suddenly, she tapped her desk with her fingernail, a single, silent, precise beat. The 5 operators, thousands of miles apart, received her metronome signal and simultaneously, in a single, perfectly coordinated half-second burst, transmitted their data. The data arrived in London. 1. Unit location, South Flank, concentration point, Prokhorovka. 2. Tank totals, confirmed 400 Panthers, 150 Tigers, the first reliable numbers. 3. Assault time, Year 4 Jur, July 5th. 4. Flank command, model, confirmed as the lead commander. 5. Contradiction, confirmed 1 key panzer division was held in reserve. The intelligence was flawless. The total transmission time across 5 operators and thousands of miles, 55 seconds. The Germans, focused on filtering the massive Soviet broadcast and the heavy jamming, recorded nothing but a slight, complex atmospheric flutter. The strategic outcome of the Battle of Kursk, the definitive turning point on the Eastern Front, was directly influenced by the rhythmic efficiency of a girl rescued from a Japanese camp. Post-war, 1947. London. A quiet, unmarked office building. The war was won, and the silence of Elara, the tactical advantage of Method A, faded into the deep files of military secrecy. The technology of radio communication rapidly evolved, making the rhythmic human method largely obsolete. However, its legacy endured. Miles Harding, now a celebrated if highly secretive figure, spearheaded the creation of the GCHQ, Government Communications Headquarters. His post-war philosophy was rooted in the lesson learned from Elara. The most advanced technology is always defeated by a deeper understanding of human pattern and culture. The final devastating twist of Elara's story is the price of her perfection. The rhythmic method that saved the Allied intelligence networks had been built upon her deep, compartmentalized trauma. The requirement for total, inhuman rhythmic focus led to a permanent detachment from all other forms of human communication. In 1947, Harding was given the solemn task of preparing her transition to civilian life. He went to her secure facility. She was sitting in a garden, watching the flowers. He spoke to her, explaining that the war was over, that she was free. He spoke for 10 minutes, detailing the gratitude of nations, the historical impact of her silence. Elara listened. She then slowly picked up a small, smooth river stone. She placed it on the wall and gently tapped it 4 times, the rhythmic signature she had used for the synchronous escape. Tap, 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 tap. Harding, ever the analyst, instinctively understood the code. It was not a message of gratitude or farewell. It was the ultimate, final operational report. Status: complete. Target: achieved. Asset: retired. Communication protocol: terminated. She had used the language of war to close the chapter of her life. The silence that had been her prison, then her weapon, had become her final sanctuary. She had traded her voice for the world's survival. Harding watched as she walked away, finally free, the river stone with its 4-tap signature left on the wall. He realized that the true mystery of her identity, her name, her home, her history, remained forever locked away in a rhythmic language no one in Europe fully understood. She had become the purest form of the legend, a ghost who saved the world by speaking only in the perfect, unbreakable silence of the code. Her story is a reminder that in the grand calculus of war, the most extraordinary victories are often won not by the roar of the engines or the thunder of the guns, but by the quiet, impossible strength found in the broken corners of the human heart. The legacy of Ilara, Le Fantôme, is the foundation of modern intelligence theory. Always look for the pattern that the machine cannot detect.